So they were given money. So I mean, I guess I'm trying to understand the motivation of these people in the same way that we see today when you have these like Bernie Sanders rallies and the, whatever patriot rallies they had, back in this early part of the summer. And we know that through sort of George Soros funded groups, they were given hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars. Any of these protesters that want to come out and be agitators, they're paid. We know
Correct.
this from TikTok influencers and others. So what's the motivation? Is it really just at the heart money, or were they somehow patriots in a way that we just didn't understand?
I don't know. A lot of people have been, and I can draw the analogy back then. There were a lot of people that were genuinely scared about the communist. I certainly was. I mean, I went through the drills of, getting under my desk when I was a little kid. We were all taught that the communists any day was going to come across the Volga Gap in Europe and annihilate everybody. But if you think back to 1948, the Soviet Unions had over 50 million people killed. Most of their industrial base had been destroyed. And the thought that there was a communist threat at the time is literally ridiculous. Not to say that communism is good or anything else. And yes, there was later on a Soviet threat, but not at the time this entire operation was being set up. And so you go into a community who had just been ruled by Mussolini, a fascist dictator, for decades, and you tell them that there is this new boogeyman in town, and he's much worse than Mussolini. They're atheists. They're going to destroy the Catholic Church, which of course is sacred in Italy. So it wouldn't be hard to find people who are patriots to volunteer to protect their town from this imminent threat. But
Right.
again, that was never the intended purpose. And it's not unlike the brainwashing that is going on with the propaganda in the United States right now, calling Trump a fascist. It is literally the same playbook. And they did this in country after country after country. And generally in every one of those countries, there was some resource that they wanted. Indonesia, we went into Indonesia. We tried to coup the government of Sukarno and failed. Then we regrouped and overthrew that government a few years later, because there were two resources there that both the Rockefeller family and the Dutch Royal Petroleum knew was there, that they had never told the Indonesian people was there. There was a literal mountain full of gold, the purest gold they had ever found, and an untapped oil reserve that they kept secret. And in both of those cases, after they overthrew the government of Sukarno and installed their puppet government of Suharto, the Rockefellers and the Dutch oil went in there and basically, again, it's a long story, but they basically stole a lot of that by saying, oh, it's not that pure, either the oil or the gold, and lied on what they were emitting back as the royalties to the Indonesian people. And that's after they killed 1 million of them in the coup.
So all of these instances where Operation Gladio was set up, it's because of some sort of a resource, a mineral resource or something in that country. And they used communism as the boogeyman. Soviets are going to invade Indonesia. They're going to take over this territory. They're going to come to Sukarno. They're going to take over this territory. They're coming to Italy next. And so we need to have these armies created, sort of a militia, if you will, I guess.
Correct.
What was their mission then? So in the case of Italy, I mentioned Bologna. Maybe you could talk a little bit about some of these terrorist activities that created these false flag events.
Well, originally, their first operation in Italy was in 1948, and it was the election. There were two people running that were kind of the odds-on favorite of being the prime minister, and one of them was very pro-NATO. Oh my God, we got to get a NATO. One of them, again, because of Mussolini, did not want to have anything to do with NATO. They wanted their country back. And of course, that person is labeled a communist sympathizer. And the CIA used $10 million In 1948, $10 million to influence that election to ensure the pro-NATO guy got involved. That was their first official interference in elections. It wasn't their last, but it was their first. And that's the entire time that we've been talking about election interference. To me, it has been blatantly obvious, both with the 2016 election and the 2020 election, that the CIA is behind both of them. If you look at where Gina Haspel was as the London CIA station chief with the creation of the Steele dossier, they are still intimately involved in election interference all around the world.
So would you say Operation Gladio is still alive and well today, just under a different name?
100%. That's why I think it's critical that people understand not only it and how it functioned early on with, and let's go back to Lyman Lemonsker, because with the JFK files, you don't hear anyone talking about this. But now that you understand the massive scope of Operation Gladio, Lyman Lemonsker was General Eisenhower in Europe's chief of logistics. What's that mean? Logistics in the military means that's the guy that's critical to get supplies where they're needed. So who would have been getting all of the weapons in Europe that now that the war's over, to these caches of weapons for Operation Gladio? It would have been General Lyman Lemonsker. That's why he's at this meeting, in order to not only understand where all of the caches are that the Nazis set up, but they're planning to put them all over Europe. So he's the logistics guy, and he's the guy that goes with Alan Dulles to this meeting. Well, of course he is. Now, where's the next time that we come to Lyman Lemonsker? Well, he ends up becoming a 4-star general, and he's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff when JFK gets into office. Lyman Lemonsker knows all about Operation Gladio. He's the author of Operations Northwood. Do you know what that is?
I do, but can you educate our audience on this?
Operation Northwood was a document that is declassified, several pages. And what it does is it is a laundry list of terrorist operations to be conducted inside the United States, killing American citizens and blaming Castro. It articulates that we're going to dress Cuban exiles that are basically our Gladio element in the United States, and was for decades. Brigade 2506, Felix Rodriguez, the guy that Tucker interviewed about 6 months ago, he's an assassin. He was part of Brigade 2506. If you go back and look at that interview, he's wearing the t-shirt, literally. And he was in El Salvador, he was in Nicaragua, he was in Guatemala, he was in Vietnam during the Phoenix program. He is one of them. So this Operation Northwood was to take some of the CIA-trained Cuban exiles in Miami, dress them up in Castro uniforms, have them go do bombings, just like we were talking about in Italy, killing people, blaming Castro, and then justifying a full-scale military invasion of Cuba in order to overthrow Castro. That's what Operation Northwood was. He briefed it to Robert McNamara, the SecDef, and Robert McNamara didn't find anything wrong with it. He says, hey, let's go brief this to JFK. When JFK read Operation Gladio, he's like, are you out of your mind? We're not going to kill Americans for any reason. So he fired General Lemonsker. Unfortunately, and this clearly indicates to me that JFK did not know the extent of Operation Gladio and this Hydra that had been set up. He had just survived the Bay of Pigs and didn't want any more military pissed off at him. So he didn't fire him and make him retire. He reassigned him out of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And do you know where they put him?
No.
He became the commander of NATO. And do you know that the French OAS that were trained by Operation Gladio trainer Otto Skorzeny, a Nazi, their OAS had 2, depending on who you read, some people say 4 operatives in Dallas, Texas, the day JFK was murdered. There are documents talking about people speaking French up on the grassy knoll. Those two OAS agents, one was flown out of Dallas that night. The other one was driven by a Dallas police officer to the Mexican border.
The more you study JFK and you realize how many people he pissed off, right? It's not surprising at all that you have the mafia involved. You have the Israelis involved. You have the CIA involved. You have, members of NATO involved who trying to upend Operation Gladio. He pissed a lot of people off.
Yes. And he also was in direct contact with Sukarno over in Indonesia and had already scheduled a visit to see him in January after in 1964. And they knew that if he ever went to see Sukarno and figured out what they were doing, that they would all be in trouble. That meeting was never going to be allowed to happen. And also, a lot of people think General Eisenhower was a great guy. Let me just assure you he was not. Not only did he oversee the creation of Operation Gladio while he was in Europe, when he becomes president, he's the guy that overthrew Iran. He's the guy that used this organization to overthrow the president in Guatemala. And what was the issue in Guatemala? Bananas. Who owned all of the Guatemalan farmland? You know, that thing that we think is absolutely horrible if China owns our farmland? Well, a U.S. oligarch owned the majority of Guatemalan's farmland, and that was United Fruit. And one of the primary stockholders of United Fruit was the Dulles brothers and the Rockefellers. And so they decided when the Guatemalan president gets elected, he said that he did not want any foreigners owning farmland. Imagine that. Right. And exactly, the irony of everything that's happening right now just blows my mind. Because what's happening in America today is what not we, you and I, but our government has done on behalf of these oligarchs all over the world. So what do? They planned PB Success, which was the name of the operation to overthrow the Guatemalan president. And that was General Eisenhower. Also, one of the very last things he did was issue a findings, which is what it's called when you order the assassination of a foreign head of state, to kill Patrice Lumumba. They killed Patrice Lumumba 3 days before JFK came into office. JFK was in office for at least 3 weeks before he knew that his CIA was complicit in killing Lumumba. He didn't even know he was dead because they had kidnapped him. And how did they do that? What was the lead up to that? Well, they basically, of course, the Congo had uranium. They were the #1 supplier of uranium. Uranium obviously was very important at the time because of the atomic weapons. And because the Congo had just gotten its independence from being a colony of Belgium for 350 years, Patrice Lumumba, their first prime minister, had said, we do not want Belgium getting rich off of to continue to get rich off of our uranium. We want to deal directly with the United States. He flies to the United States, and the vice president will not meet him, Nixon. Eisenhower will not meet him. So he's stuck going to see the Secretary of State. And he tells the Secretary of State, I'll sell you 100% of our uranium, but I don't want Belgium profiting from it. They told him to pound sand. And he goes back and he says, okay, well, if you're not going to deal with me, I know now that I've made this very clear, and you made it very clear that you don't like my stance on this. The IMF is immediately turned off. The World Bank won't talk to him. So they economically strangle him. And he has only one option to get weapons for what he knows is going to come. The only person that at that point will answer his phone is the Soviet Union. What happens as soon as that phone call is made? They call him a communist. He's not a communist, but because they call him a communist and Eisenhower, and it started with Truman actually, 10-2, a National Security Action Memorandum says, if you are labeled a communist, we have the right to kill you. And so Eisenhower issues a finding to kill Lumumba.
And JFK didn't know about this?
And we all know that 4 months from the time you're a president-elect until you take office, that you are supposed to be being updated with intelligence briefings of what you're walking into. He knew nothing about it.
Yeah, this Lumumba story we've covered this before on our show, and all of the secrecy around it, and not allowing JFK to be aware of this in the lead up to his presidency. This was carried out. I think there was some speculation that he did know about it, or he was somehow briefed on it, or whatever. But I've not seen anything conclusive on that. So you haven't either, then, right?
I have not seen anything that he was briefed on it. I have seen statements from CIA officers that says he was not.
So that's just one example. We have Guatemala as another example. We have Italy as another example. How many people do you think have been killed? Do we have a number of how many people were millions at the hands of these NATO stay-behind armies?
Not directly. Because of the overthrows of these governments, like in Indonesia, 1 million people ended up dying. We destabilized Cambodia. The Pol Pot coming to power was a direct result of a CIA instigated coup. We had people there training in Cambodia. We had people training in Laos. We had people training in one of the most devastating parts of all of this is how much of our federal government was infected with it. You mentioned earlier USAID. USAID had an office called the Office of Public Safety.